All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody who is having an opportunity to see us and participate in the Perspectives with the Dreammakers Network. Truly appreciate you taking time to connect with us. And I'm so excited this afternoon to have an opportunity to speak with someone who I am just enamored with in so many ways as it relates to business, community, leadership, all things relative to supporting the plight of Black people and just, I mean, just the history of this young lady who we're getting ready to speak to and her family. And I just want to take a quick second before I bring her on to talk about this particular program with Perspectives with the Dreammakers Network, which is where we take an opportunity to meet with people to hear about their life from their perspective. And we say that primarily because so many times you hear about people and folks have different perspectives on other people. And especially if you're doing something worth, folks' attention, if you will, for somebody to have an idea about you. And we want to have an opportunity to hear from the leaders, people who've been active and really making a difference for years in the past and continuously working hard to make a difference in our communities. And so today we have the opportunity to speak with Dr. Frances Toni Draper, who is the publisher of the AFRO newspaper, something that is a newspaper that's very near and dear to my heart. But I thought that it would be important to have all of you get a chance to meet her and get a chance to learn a little bit about her background. So we're going to bring on Dr. Toni Draper. How are you doing?
I am well. I'm well. Thank you, Byron. And how are you? So I hear a little echo that usually happens when both of us have our mics open. So yeah, I know that that happens. But thank you so much for inviting me here on today. Thank you for all the kind things that you said. I really appreciate it. And hello to everybody who's watching. I can't see you, but I'm glad you're here.
And I'm glad you gave me that studio tidbit, as this is the first time that I'm actually using this platform for this program. But I thought it made sense as we're now diving into so many unique ways to continue to, we would normally probably meet at a great location in Baltimore City somewhere. But now that we're actually in two different states at the moment, we want to continue to be able to capture the information. So these platforms and technology, things I've never heard of before now, are actually right here at our fingertips so we can use. But we're going to try to make this work for everybody. So for your pleasure and for everybody to participate. But I wanted to take a second and really give folks an opportunity to learn more about who you are. Tell us a little bit more about Toni Draper. Who is Toni Draper? And if you can, share a little bit about the AFRO newspaper for those who've never had an opportunity to hear about the great and historical AFRO newspaper.
Well, let me start, Byron. Thank you by talking about the AFRO newspaper. A little easier to talk about the paper and I'm not used to talking about myself, but I am used to talking a lot about the paper. But the AfroAmerican newspaper was founded August of 1892, that's 128 years ago, by my great-grandfather, John Henry Murphy Sr. And we were told, the family history says that John Henry Murphy Sr. was 52 years old, had served as a sergeant in the colored troops of the Civil War, and at 52 years old, married with 10 children. He and his wife, Martha, decided to start a publication to just give good news about our community. Reportedly, only 2% of the Black population could read at that time. There's a little bit more to the history in that he was a printer before he was a publisher. And so he was a printer for a publication that the Reverend Alexander of the Sharon Baptist Church and Father George Bragg of the St. James Episcopal Church, that they put out every week on this printing press. But they printed a feed sheet. Byron, you know what a feed sheet is? So there were animals in Baltimore that needed to be fed. And so they They were on a street called Watcoat Street, and they printed a one-page feed sheet that gave you the prices of the feed that week. But it turns out that Father Bragg and Reverend Alexander were better preachers than they were publishers, and so they decided to sell at an auction. The name was already in existence, AfroAmerican, and their printing press. Now the story gets a little fuzzy from there because at the auction, it auctioned for $200. John Henry Murphy Sr. did not have $200, but his wife, Martha, did. So the women in the family say she loaned him the $200. The men in the family say that's ridiculous. She gave him $200. They were one. But nonetheless, it was purchased at an auction, and there started the AfroAmerican newspaper as a one-page, 3 cents a copy. And in fact, your viewers can go to the Enoch Pratt Free Library if you have a library card, and you can see the 1890. The earliest paper that we have is an 1893 paper, but that's pretty early. So that's there. I said they had 10 children and 5 boys, 5 girls. And so the boys were all tapped by their dad to do something in the paper and also take care of their daughters, even though one of the daughters ended up being on the board of the AFRO. My grandfather, Carl, was asked to be the editor to succeed his father. His father asked him that before he died. But Carl had other plans. He would help his dad on the weekends. But he was a Howard grad and a Harvard grad, and he was chair of the German department of Howard University in Washington. But he would come over on the weekends to help his dad with the paper. But his dad said, listen, when I'm not here any longer, I want you to be the person that takes over. So that's what happened in 1922. And so Carl Murphy became the publisher then. But by then he was already married to my grandmother, Vashti Turley Murphy, one of the co-founders of Delta Sigma Theta. So they were married. They had 5 daughters, much to my grandfather's, I don't want to say disappointment, but I think, so he called, like my mother's name was Frances, I'm named for her. So he called her Frankie. They were Frankie and Johnny and whatever other boy names he could call them, but he had 3 daughters, right, one behind the other, including a set of twins whom he groomed for the paper. And 4 of them went to journalism school out of the state of Maryland at the state of Maryland's expense, because in Maryland you had to go to the Black university. And if the Black college or university did not offer you a major, you could not go to the University of Maryland. So the state of Maryland paid my mother's tuition. She went to the University of Wisconsin. Her sister went to the University of Wisconsin. One of them went to the University of Minnesota. And so thanks to the state of Maryland, my mother said when she got there, the people in Wisconsin looked at her skin and said, what's wrong? They've never seen Black people before. Is there some kind of Mardi Gras in your city? And she said she got on the phone and called her dad and said, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. I want to come home. He said, oh, no, you're not coming home. Your sister's there. State of Maryland is paying and you're staying. And so I've skipped a whole lot of in between. It wasn't just about my grandfather. His brothers each worked in the paper. So everybody had a job to do. At the height of the Afro's popularity rather, and circulation, we had 13 editions, a couple of 100,000, papers were printed a week. We owned our own press, employed 200 or 300 people, and quite a force in terms of the voice for, that's one of the things about live shows, Byron, you should tell, you have to turn your cell phone.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we covered everything from Jesse Owens at the Olympics. We had reporters, the first Black paper to have reporters to cover World War II. So Carl Murphy sent them, and they were war correspondents. And from their service there, we published a book called This Is Our War, which I don't know if it's still in circulation. I have a couple of copies at home. And so things like that, the Afro was in the forefront. And so here we are. I'm skipping over some parts because I could talk about this for your entire hour, but I know you have other things that you asked about. But the Afro today is still alive and well. we still print a legacy product. There are many, many people who still want a print edition. However, you could only get it by being a subscriber or a member through afro.com. But we also have a very robust website. That's where all the local breaking and national, international breaking news can be found. And we hope that your viewers will like us on Facebook and Instagram. We're trying to get to 10,000 on Instagram. Byron, we're at 9,800. So maybe by the time this is viewed, we'll be at the 10,000, and we're almost at 700,000 on Facebook. So we understand the power of social media, but we also understand the power of being a respected, trusted voice for our community. So social media doesn't drive the news. Sometimes, social media is our tool that we use to get the news out. I could stay on that soapbox for a little bit, because if those who own social media decide to lock us all out tomorrow, it'll be their call. And so that's a little bit about the Afro, unless you have a specific question about it. And
I got to tell you, because I completely love this history. I actually have a book. I don't know if I've told you this, but I have a book that someone wrote. I don't know who wrote this book. Last name Farrar.
Hayward Farrar. His first name is Farrar. Mm-hmm.
I have that book. I've had it maybe about a year and a half now. Read the entire book. So as you were talking, I was clicking some of the pages of the book was popping in my brain, and I also, I can, just talk to you about the Afro all day. I remember the first time I went to, actually, let me go even before that. The first time I went to the museum in Washington, D.C., which is just a museum about the news and newspapers. Unfortunately, it's no longer in existence. But all throughout the museum were articles and the actual pages of the Afro newspaper. Whenever they needed to highlight something that was relative to African-American history from the early 1900s all the way to President Obama becoming president, you would see the title, the Afro newspaper. And it was just, actually, to be honest with you, that was one of the reasons why I even joined the museum. And then when the new African-American Museum came out in DC, you walk through just about every floor, there was another, just the details, the information that they were trying to store, that they were trying to tell, they had to use. You can't tell the story without talking about the Afro newspaper. They showed the printing press. It was just, for someone who didn't grow up in Baltimore and have that access and know that bit of history growing up, I still felt very immensely proud to see that every level of the museum. And so to hear you talk about the Afro in the context from a family perspective, even when you mentioned your grandmother, I remember when I was in college at Tuskegee and my friends who were pledging Delta, and so I would help them, with helping them understand the history of the organization. And I remember saying that name 1,000 times, Vashti Terry Murphy. And now I'm speaking with a granddaughter. So it's unbelievable just how these worlds come together over the years. So I know I do want to, and part of what for those of you, just full disclosure, I really wanted to kind of dig a bit more into the personal aspect and really from the perspective of, someone who's growing up in a very historic family, if you will, and then just especially from a Black perspective, and if that had any if it influenced you in any way as a kid growing up to do certain things, to go in certain directions. What was it like from your perspective as a young person in a family as that you grew up in?
Or to run away in the other direction, right?
Yes, right, or the opposite.
I kind of had it from both sides. From my mom's side, my mother was the youngest of Carl and Vashti Murphy's daughters, of the 5 daughters. And my mom had 3 children, my brother, my sister, and me. Her sisters had together, there were 13 more of them. So there were 16 of us who were first cousins, and a Carl on one end, named for my grandfather Carl, and a Carl on the other end. So the Carl and the Carl, and then 14 of us that were born maybe anywhere from a month to 7 years apart. We were all just like one right behind the other. And so growing up, our mothers being sisters, they were very, very close. I don't think there's 5 years between all five of them. So very, very close. Most of them, except for one of my aunts who moved to Buffalo, they worked at the paper. We went to Carl Murphy's house every week. Did I say we went every week? We went every week. And for us to go from West Baltimore, where we lived, to Northeast Baltimore near Morgan University, where he and my grandmother lived, we called that going to the country. You know, Cold Spring Lane is slow enough now with almost like, it was a lane. So we call that going to the country.
Wow.
We went there every week. And sometimes we went twice a week or 3 times a week if my grandfather had special guests there and he wanted my mom or one of her sisters to be there. And I grew up in an era where, children weren't a part of those conversations. You went, but Martin Luther King came to the house or somebody like that, you went someplace else, like outside, downstairs. You were not a part of the conversation. And so my cousins and I think, I forgot to tell you, my grandfather believed that if you could walk, you could write. You could write. So, you wrote and you wrote and you wrote. And when you got old enough for him to put you on a payroll, which usually was about 12 at 50 cents an hour, that's what it was, right? But you wrote, I covered stories. I got on the bus to do that, because I didn't have a license when I was doing some writing. We would say, well, go figure it out.
Yeah.
Just go figure it out. And that was on, like the weekends and, holidays and summer vacations sometimes. We had vacations. Now, I don't want to say we didn't have vacations, but we worked. So I think the 16 of us, we kind of put our heads together, at least the 14 of us who were close together in age, and we said, you know what? When we get old, we're not doing this. We are not doing this paper thing, because this was a morning, noon, and night thing. Our mothers worked for the paper, right? Okay. In my case, my mother and my dad worked for the paper. In fact, in every case, the 4 sisters who stayed here in Baltimore, they and their husbands they worked at the paper. So we were at the Richmond AFRO, my family and I. We were at the Washington AFRO. We were mostly at the Baltimore AFRO. So we had this unwritten pact. We would kind of look at each other across the dinner table and like, no, we're not doing this.
We ain't doing it.
We're not doing this 24/7 Afro stuff that they're doing, right? And because we were in the middle of everything, when one of the parks was integrated, after the Accommodations Act was passed back in the mid-50s, I was a little girl. But I remember people throwing rocks at my car. I remember when my grandfather said the NAACP needs some kids to be a test case to see if this anti-discrimination suit is really working. I mean, they threw us in the car. People threw rocks at the window and called us all kinds of names. I'm like, how did we get here? But but we grew up in a civil rights family. So, rocks thrown at the car, the March on Washington, any kind of demonstration. Our parents weren't, okay, you guys are going to stay home and then we'll talk to you when you get back home. It was, get your shoes on, you're going. Yeah. It's part of your education, you're going. And so we learned early on about community activism, and we also learned early on about giving back to the community. So we didn't look at ourselves as any different from anybody else. We worked hard. And the AFRO had a 501c3 charitable arm before 501c3 was even a regulation. Wow. We got grandfathered into that. So we had outreach programs, and we worked those things. We went to church together as a family. New Year's Eve, if you wanted to go out, you had to go by Carl Murphy's house first. And say all the family prayers, and then maybe because he was a writer of prayers. So I have a collection of his. He wrote prayers about everything, anything that was, and he was also chair of the board of Morgan College. The prayers he wrote before a board meeting, or he wrote a prayer one time that said, "Dear God, please tell Mr. Eisenhower that we're not his people, that we belong to you." He wrote a prayer about everything. So I have a collection of his prayers that actually in a book, but the book's not published yet. But
Yeah,
but
I'm thinking to myself, sounds like another book. Sounds
yeah,
like
right. But the
another one
manuscript.
that I would love for my library over here. I can tell you.
Well, I've written one book and co-authored a second book. So, but this book is, I mean,
Mhm.
it's actually not in process of being typed. It's actually typed up. The cover's done. I just gotta sit still and get the edits. And it's called Prayers of a Publisher. So
Oh, okay.
working on that. So active in his church. So that's what it was like growing up for us. And so we just, how you never say never. We decided we were going to do different things. So
Yeah.
I pursued a different path. I wrote for the paper all through high school and through college, but that was not my major, and it certainly was not my intent. And none of my other cousins either. We all who were in Baltimore, the 13 of us in Baltimore, 3 in Buffalo. But if you were you took the pictures or you wrote the story, but it wasn't just our family. Carl Murphy, remember, is one of 10. So his brothers and sisters also had children, and some
Okay.
of them were also involved in the paper, and most of them were and still are shareholders of the company. So I don't know what else.
I tell you, there's so much that you packed in there. First of all, I got excited when you talked about the prayers of a publisher. I'm like, I can't wait to have that book. So at some point within the next 3 years, we will definitely we have to get that one published. The other thing is,
It's ready. It's been ready. I mean, it's been ready, but yeah, it's ready. I went back to the Afro. You never say never, right? I'm
yeah.
jumping over a whole lot of years, but I've been back 3 times. So in my third, the first was to go to New Jersey in 1974. The career path that I pursued was I was a foreign language teacher, taught French and Spanish in the Baltimore City Public Schools.
Oh wow.
French, Spanish, and manners to my favorite group of folk. Those are in the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. My absolute favorite age group of people.
Wow.
And then I left.
And you went right down the road I was getting ready to ask you. So if
Okay.
you chose not to go into publishing and go into the business, then what path did you decide was your fate going forward as a young adult?
Well, as a high schooler, my interests were foreign languages and business. So I was a member of junior achievement in public speaking, but not, I wasn't a person that liked the stage, but I did like to get a message across. So I could stand on the stage and look at the clock in the back of the auditorium in school, memorize the speech and say it. So I liked that. And I liked business. So I like talking, I like business, I like teaching. I didn't like to be in the spotlight a lot, but I did like to do those 3 things. So when I finished Morgan, I told you that my grandfather was chair of the board of Morgan, and I told you he lived in Morgan Park, right?
Yep.
Okay, so when we would go out there on our weekly visits, or sometimes twice a week, he'd walk us over to Morgan's campus, and he'd say, "You see this beautiful campus?" And we would say, "Yes, sir." He would say, and he'd start pointing to us, you're going to Morgan. And he would just tell us that like every week that we were going to Morgan. Wow. So my mother said to the 3 of us, one of you is going to the University of Wisconsin. Well, because my brother and I were older than my sister, we told her, you're going to Wisconsin. We don't like cold weather. We're not going to Wisconsin. We told her that. My grandfather said, you're going to Morgan. He told the 2 older ones that because she was 7 years younger than I. And when we told her, when my mother said, no, I need somebody to go to Wisconsin, we said, my sister's name is Susan. We said, Susan, guess where you're going to college? And she would say, where? And we said, you're going to the University of Wisconsin. She would say, really? Where is that? We said, don't worry about it. That's where you're going.
Don't even ask.
But but 10 of Carl Murphy's grandchildren went to Morgan. 10 of us went to Morgan, and my sister, you know where she went, right? The University of Wisconsin. Majored in journalism and never took a job in journalism. She got married and had 5 kids, but she didn't do that either.
Wow.
So none of us, my brother went to medical schools, somebody else went to business. We went to all these different career paths. Having started out at the AFRO. So go ahead.
So you had 3, and we know now that you're at the AFRO, but you've had 3 different tenures there. So
yep.
what was the first time?
Well, the first time is when you're very young and you just
okay, got it.
You do the writing and stuff for the 50 cents an hour. I did that every summer, vacations. Being in the news dissemination business. I don't call it the newspaper business. And by my mother and her sisters being very ingrained on the editorial side. We have some family members that were on the production side or the advertising side. There was always a story, right? So, and because my grandfather, as I said, believed that if you could walk, you could write, I was always writing something. So that was just all the way through high school, all the way through college. In extra spare time, whatever that was, I would do that kind of writing. That was the first thing. Then 5 years into my teaching career, my mother, my grandfather had died by then. He died in 1967. He died when I was in college. My mother was the chairman of the board. And there was some discussion around closing the New Jersey office. And so I asked her, I said, well, on what basis? And she was, talking about revenue slowdown. I said, well, what does it take to turn it around? She says, I don't know. I'm just going by what people have told me. So I said, well, I have a proposal for you. We'll go to New Jersey and take a look at it and see what the recommendation is. She said, you'll do what? I said, yeah, we'll go to New Jersey. She said, you're teaching school? I said, yeah, teachers are on strike. They were. I said, so, I'll go up there, while they're on strike. I'm not walking the picket line right now, so I'll go. So we went, but we decided to stay. So
where in New Jersey?
Newark.
Newark, okay. Perfect place for an AFRO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Newark. Yeah. Newark was where the office was. So in northern New Jersey. So we went to, my husband and I had just gotten married and we went to New Jersey.
Wow.
Yep. Wow. And we left our oldest son here with my mom. That lasted about 3 weeks. She said, young children are for young parents. Y'all come get this kid. So, so that's where we were. So that was my first time. And then after we did the assessment and wrote the report and said this is what we thought needed to happen to really make that office viable, they had a decision to make. And they decided still they wanted to close that office. And so we came on back to Baltimore. And I did a whole lot of other things. I didn't go back to the AFRO. We had our daughter while I was in New Jersey. And when I came back, both my husband and I, now we're looking for a job, right? And so there was an ad in the paper that said that Merrill Lynch was having an open house and they were looking for account execs. So my husband and I said, well, we don't know what that's about, but we're going to check it out. But I actually, had just had the baby in like July, and this was August and September. So my clothing choices were limited, but I didn't throw on a pair of jeans. I did throw on something decent. And at the end of this thing, they said, oh, and by the way, we're interviewing and hiring on the spot. So I'm looking at my husband, and I said, well, you go talk to them. He said, no, you go talk to them because you're dressed. I have on jeans. I'm not doing it. So long story short, I did. Merrill Lynch had just settled a discrimination suit for not having blacks, men or women, but especially not women. And so I was hired by them.
Wow.
And went
through markets. In the financial markets.
in the financial markets, because it's all about relationships in that.
That's right. It's all about relationships.
They'll teach you what you need to know about finances as long as you can still say that 2 + 2 is 4.
That's right.
You can pass the test. Because at that time, the brokerage test, you could not use a calculator. You had to figure it all out on pen and paper. So Maryland trained you, and you went to New York and spent 5 or 6 weeks in New York getting trained some more. Then you took this test and hoped that when they put the piece of paper in the little cubby hole that yours said pass or not fail. I don't think I could have taken that test twice. I was a foreign language major.
Exactly. So connecting those two dots.
Right. Connecting those dots.
Oh man, that is something.
I have many more career changes before I get back to the AFRO, which is in the 80s for the second time.
Well, and actually, that was part of what I wanted to also talk about, because when I met you originally, the first time I met you even before I made the connection between the AFRO and everything. I met you as Pastor Draper, and so I'd love to hear more about that and how you ended up in the ministry.
Well, okay. How much time you have?
I know.
How much time do you have? But let me fill in a little bit of the gaps. So,
okay.
I was at Merrill Lynch, and I was recruited to go to Morgan in the development to be assistant VP of development.
Okay.
I was in the middle of my MBA, and so I went on and I finished my MBA. I did another degree. I did a master's in education somewhere in there too. That's before I went to Merrill Lynch. And while I was at Morgan, I'm trying to think. I had to get my sequencing straight. I would have to come back to the paper. It was this is a long story, so I'm not going to tell you this long story. Just suffice to say that our family-owned business has lots and lots of shareholders, and the way the shareholders exercise their shareholder right was historically through voting trusts. And voting trusts usually ran every 10 years, and when they expired or whatever, there would be a new coalition of family that would pool our stock to control the company for the next 10 years. I guess I'll say it that way. That's probably the best way to say it. In the in the early mid 80s, our generation, this generation that said we weren't going to never do this. So remember, I said it's not just the Carl Murphy family, there are other families, because John Murphy, they had 10 children. But there were other families, members in my generation, who thought, you get to be around 30 and you think, I can do this, I can run this. I can do this better than my parents can do it. Yeah. But anyway, we were able to, without getting into all the details because it takes too long, we were able to control the top management of the company.
Okay.
And to consolidate the stock in a way that Jake Oliver was able to become the publisher. And I know I'm getting to your question a long way about the ministry. I'm getting there. I'm a preacher too, so you got to just, I just have to tell you that I'm getting ready to close. I'm getting ready to close.
That's right. You hadn't said that yet, so I don't.
It's a 7-part. It's the 7-part close. So the way this thing was supposed to work was that once we had an opportunity to run the company, he was going to run it because I was helping out, and I was going to not yet going to the ministry, but I was going to do something else. It wasn't the AFRO. But by the time we did that, he was practicing law again, and decided that he wanted to stay there for a little while. So I ended up being in charge of the company. And then he did come back when we worked together for a while. But about 10, not even that many years, maybe 3-4 years into that, I was called into the ministry. And it's a calling of God. So, we could go through that whole experience. Again, in the interest of time, I won't. But I accepted that calling, and I began to exercise my preaching gift in a whole lot of different places, all over the place, all over the world. In fact, had the opportunity to preach in a lot of places. And I had said to Jake, I really want to do my ministry full time. I want a book I want to write. I want to do a ministry full time. I love the family business, but it's really hard work. And during those times, in the whole way you produce the product, I mean, we'd be up all night sometimes.
Yeah.
And don't let the press go down. Oh my God. No, and even though Jake and I worked together, and we outsourced after a while. We outsourced because we didn't know enough about the printing press. We knew a little bit about the business. We knew what to do to kind of take over for to be in charge, along with another segment of the family, right? But we had to learn a whole lot about really what we were doing and how to do it. And so, but after we were a few years in, and he came back to the paper, then I left around 99 to go into ministry full time. So that's how I got there. And I was there in that space, not as a pastor until 2001 or 2002. I was there in that space until 2018.
Wow.
And then was asked to come back in this role.
That's right. And you came back in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. And the thing is, and I don't know if you knew this about me, but I come from a long line of preachers and teachers myself.
Oh, okay.
And so it's so interesting when when you have an opportunity to work in business, in the business field, you're working in the community, but you're also a pastor and pastoring a church, and being able to be the spiritual leader for people who of different backgrounds and different communities, and so it's a lot to take on, even for somebody who, especially I will say, for someone who already has other businesses and things to focus on. And so I'd love to just hear your thoughts as it relates to those two worlds, being the community leader, being the spiritual leader, but at the same time being the business leader, trying to do all those things at the same time.
And I'd love to hear about your family and that whole journey as well. So you'll have to tell me about that.
I will definitely tell you all about that.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about some commonalities first before we talk about the differences. Okay. So I believe that you bring your whole self to a situation, and that this practice that some of us have of parking our spirituality at the door of our business ventures is counter to who we are as whole people. So my great-grandfather said in his description of the company when he founded it, he said, a newspaper succeeds because it believes in God, and it believes in itself, and it believes in the present generation. And so the company was founded on Christian principles. And that does not mean that everybody who worked for us or who currently works for us believes the same thing that we do.
Yeah.
So it's not church, but it is a place where Christian values are not hidden under a rock. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I bring my whole self to whatever I do. And so I have two platforms. One as a pastor. Yes, it's a lot of care for people. Like even right now, I mean, so many people are sick. So it's a lot of care for people, but it's also communicating a message. And that's the same thing we do at the AFRO. We communicate a message. And we're communicating it in 2021 much differently than we did in 1892. Yet it still is a relevant message for our community. As a preacher, as a pastor, I'm communicating some good news. As Afro publisher, we're communicating some good news. Now, all of the news that we communicate is not good, but you read your Bible carefully, and everything that's in the Bible is not something that you would say, "Oh, this is just great." You know, this is great that these folks are into slavery. This is great that Tamar was raped. You know, this is great that Solomon's child died. No, everything that you read is not great. But the bottom line though is there's still good news, right? It's good news of the gospel. So for me, it's not a real. It's a difference in where I'm, but where I'm doing it and how we do it, and it's different. But it still fits with who I am. And anybody who says that pastoring is just about preaching is mistaken. If you are the senior pastor of a church, you're also a business person.
That's right.
You're in the business of spreading the gospel. That's your product. But you also have that responsibility for maintaining the things that go along with that. Now, God has seen fit that we don't have the buildings right now. Doesn't mean you don't have to take care of them just because you're not in them.
That's right. That's right.
For me, there are similarities. So at the AFRO, and it's not mandatory, people can opt out, but we start every meeting with prayer. And we stop and minister, if you will, to the whole people, the whole person, right? Because if I have a team member whose grandmother just died, and we just keep having we have staff meeting every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 4:30. But part of that agenda is to check in with people to see how they're doing. Just stop for a minute. Yeah. What's going on? What did you feel when George Floyd? Just dealing with people, not just product and business, right? And so for me, it's a continuity. That's just for me personally. And that's just my leadership style. So I don't feel the pull the same way as you might say, oh my God, how do you do all of that? Also, part of my leadership style, Byron, and you know this already, is if we have people, whether they're in the church or in the AFRO, who have both the gifting, the calling, and the responsibility to do something, then you let them do it.
That's right.
Okay, I don't need to micromanage
everything
that people are doing. I do believe, that people do what you inspect and not what you expect as a business principle. But I don't believe you have to inspect every single little teeny thing.
Right.
You have to understand. And so I have to stay in my lane. And so when I first got to the AFRO, it was an assessment, to make sure you have the right people. We've all heard this on the bus, in the right seats on the bus. And it also people are on the bus that can drive the bus sometimes. I don't have to drive the bus all the time. So that's how, and so even in the church, I've been blessed that we have 10 other preachers there. I'm the only one that preach. So when I was assigned to this church, there were only 8 people. There are many more people there, but many ministers have come through our ministry, many of them. And some have gone on to plant their own churches. 2 of them are getting ready to leave now to launch a church. And so I believe in grooming people, pushing people to their purpose, and helping them to reach where they are supposed to be. And I recognize they are not my people.
Yeah.
They're God's people.
That's right.
And the team at the AFRO, they're not mine. They belong to God. And this is the assignment that they're on. So if they resonate with that, we all going to, do what we have to do to make a difference for our community and to make a difference on the bottom line. Because if you can't impact the bottom line, then you can't employ the people, and the people can't be employed at a rate that helps them take care of their families. That's always been the AFRO's mantra. Whether you were a Murphy or not didn't matter. You were a part of the AFRO family. and so many people raise their families being a part of the Afro family.
Wow. This is golden stuff that we're learning right now, and I know we have about 5 more minutes. I wanted to kind of finish up with that. The storyline is so powerful. I think about my grandfather was a bishop in the Church of God in Florida, but he started churches all up and down the East Coast, from New York all the way down to Miami. And when I moved to this area, actually, I was living in Delaware, and I drove out to Seaford, which is and went to visit one of the churches that he started back in the 60s. And, you know, it was just, and even to this day, and this is why history, I think, is so important, because, you know, you can go and visit churches that were started years ago, or businesses that were started years ago, or in any type of entity, and you see someone being a good steward of that was created, and that's still being beneficial to people to this day. And so that's one of the things that attracted me to the AFRO, a business that was started in 1892, and now here in 2021, still adding great value. And even in a short amount of time that I've been involved and had a chance to have access to just all that the AFRO is doing, there's so much change and growth that has happened. And so I wanted to kind of end on the note of looking into the future, as you think about the role that Black media, that the AFRO as an entity in and of itself really can play in what we see coming up now in this technology age. But at the same time, as we look at the transitions that are happening, you know, I really believe that 2020 was just a line in the sand moment in our country, and that the way things were before 2020, or say over the past 50 years, it's just that, and it will be end in 2020, and then 2021 going forward creates a brand new era. And just thinking about the AFRO and its role in the new era that we're going into now, what are your thoughts on the role of the AFRO and Black media going forward?
Let me say this. I absolutely agree with you that I think that 2020 is a turning point for Black businesses period, but especially in our industry. It's no secret that newspapers in the legacy form, in the print form that, you know, many of us grew up with, it's no secret that that's been on the decline for a while. However, as I said earlier, there's many of us who still like to have, you know, there are people who tell me, I don't want to read my news online. I'd like to have it in my hand. And that's fine, you know, and they're not always older people. Sometimes they're younger people that like to do that. They say, I want to cut it out. I don't want to print it out, you know, so, okay, that's fine. But one thing that we've been working on and planning for a while is this whole transformation to digital, right? We know most of us consume our news right here, right here. We get news alerts. Something happens in the Biden administration, you get an alert from everything that you ever thought you subscribed to, right? And sometimes it's just headline news. And so we are very intentional about building out both our website but in particular our social media platforms. We're very intentional about that. We're also very intentional. I think the other wave of the future, in addition to, you know, your newsletters and your constant, you know, news coming at you, are collaborations. And so 10 of the leading Black newspapers across the country have formed a collaboration called Word in Black, wordinblack.com. And so it ranges from the AFRO and the Washington Informer. We are both in Baltimore and Washington, and the New York Amsterdam News on the East Coast, to the West Coast, where you have the Sacramento Observer and the Seattle Medium, to the Atlanta Voice, and then the Real Times media publications, which include Pittsburgh Courier, Michigan Chronicle, and then there's the St. Louis American, Atlanta, I said, Dallas Weekly, and I may have left out somebody, but there are 10 of us that are collaborating on ways that we collectively can get the news out to a national platform. One thing that we're concerned about, and I hope that your viewers will be concerned about this, is that everybody that purports to report Black news is not Black. They're not Black in their ownership, which is important. They may have a Black face, But if the ownership decides tomorrow the black news is not important, it goes away. And so a lot of times we get fooled into thinking that, okay, and you will have advertisers tell us this, well, black people read the Sun. Yeah, they do. We're not saying black people shouldn't read the Sun. They read the Sun, the Times, the Post, or whatever. But those publications cannot devote as much space and time as black papers do to the things that concern us. And we don't control those things. So I'm really concerned. There are only 230 black newspapers left in the country. That may sound like a lot. It is a drop in the bucket. That's for the entire United States. And many of them are having a hard time converting to the digital platform. You can convert to digital, but then you have to figure out, well, how do you monetize it? What are people willing to pay for?
That's right.
We all want our news instantly. And if we run up to a paywall, sometimes we'll slide onto the next news site. Mm-hmm. So I tell people for the Afro, please become a member. This is a shameless plug. Please go to afro.com and become a member. You can get the paper digitally for $40 a year. That's less than the cost of 4 Starbucks.
Yep.
Right? A week's worth of Starbucks. And we need your support. We're gonna put a paywall up, but we haven't done it yet. So but do that. Support us on theafromall.com, where you can buy some swag. And so I hope I answered your question about where we're going in the future. It's it's the digitization, which we've already done. It's also the digitization of our archives, which we've only scratched the surface. We have 1 million photographs. So we've scratched the surface on that. It's raising dollars to expand our newsrooms. Because the platform is just a vehicle. I keep telling people, people say, well, I get my news online. That's just a vehicle. You still have to have the people to gather the news, and you just don't want to rehash what somebody else has said.
That's right.
Best interest. Even when they say they're black, I'm just telling us, I had a flyer yesterday, Byron, across my computer, a group out of Florida, one of the universities, they're doing a panel on black newspapers, on supporting black newspapers. And not one person on that panel is affiliated with a black newspaper. Not one. NPR and something else. And so anyway, I don't even want to jump.
What story are they telling? And see, and it's time to finish. We're at the hour now. But I just want to say, this is, black media, and its importance at this particular time. Its importance throughout history, and as we still try to evolve, and we're working actively trying to evolve as a people. We need to document and tell our own stories. We need to, whether it be the historical stories, but even the current state of what's going on in our neighborhoods and our communities. And, and as I look into the future, I'm a member of the AFRO. And so I receive the tangible paper newspaper once a week. But at the same time, my daughter sees that and she reads, and I have her read certain sections for me, and so we can, it's conscious in her mind, as someone who's 9 years old, and even in the future means even something more to her than it does to me, and so we want to be able to create these generational, treasures that we have here with the AFRO and other entities like that. And so I just want to say thank you so much for your time today to do this.
Before you hang up, though, before we get off, I want to thank you. Byron works with and heads up our business advisory council, and so we thank you for that. And we're having a Black Business Matters Expo on February 18th, a digital conference where Robert Smith is our keynote speaker, and we will also hear from Mayor Brandon Scott. We'll hear from Calvin Butler, who is the new president of the Greater Baltimore Committee. The registration is free. Somebody say free.
Free.
So if you go to afro.com and just click on that, and I would be remiss if I didn't invite folk. If people want to be a sponsor, that's still available. A lot of people say they want to be a vendor. You can be a vendor for under $200. Again, go to afro.com or contact Byron. He knows how to get in contact with the right people. And we're going to give an award to Mr. Eddie Brown. We're going to honor him as the Black Business Matters Person of the Year just for all the phenomenal things that he's done in business and in life and in his philanthropic, endeavors. And so, I'm sorry, Brian, I know you were ready to end, but I didn't want to end without inviting people to join us on February 18th.
Well, you did exactly what I was hoping you were going to do. I was going to tee it up, but you ran right into it. So I appreciate that. I mean, and it's so timely right now when we talk about the Black Business Matters. And this is a great time for all of us, as again, we're in this transition period. And so many people are thinking about, I do this really well, but how do I scale up? You know, it's great for me to be in business by myself, a sole member LLC or sole proprietor, but how do you scale up? And the people who who definitely have done that will be sharing with us. And so I can't wait. What's the date?
The date is February 18th, and I'm so glad you said, how do we scale up? 94%, listen to this, y'all, 94% of Black businesses are sole proprietors, don't have any employees. And so we got to move that needle.
Yeah.
We have to. We have a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of Black businesses, but you can put us all together and we will not make the Fortune 500. So something is wrong with that. We're great consumers.
Yeah, that's right. Great consumers.
And we have great ideas and we're brilliant people.
Yeah.
And yes, structural racism has held us back, but we had to learn how to support our own. We hope this expo will help us with some of that, and to not, as I say, drink the Kool-Aid, especially even in our media, because I heard people say, well, Black people just listen to the radio. No, we don't just listen to the radio. We'd start another whole conversation about.
That's right. Fresh one.
We want to educate about Black media, but we want to know about your business. Those of you who are watching this, if you have a business, we invite you, we implore you, we beg you, join us for free.
Again,
you might not hang out the whole day. We understand none of us does the whole day in front of the computer, I hope. But it's gonna be up for 30 days, but register, because what we're trying to show too is the power of Black entrepreneurship, the power of Black business. And we want to say to folk, and we already have like 200-300 people that are registered. We want to say we got 1,000 registrants or more for this expo.
I like that charge. I'm going to get on my business between now and then of really pushing this, because to have 1,000 people plugged in at that time, getting this type of information, because I really do believe that 2021 really is the line in the sand where we move forward, and being able to own and create and have a generational wealth mindset, I believe business has to play a big role in that. And so, we're not going to do it just by earning $1 or $2 working for somebody. We have to think entrepreneurial, even if you're doing all at the same time. And some of the great stories are people who've done both. And so this is a great opportunity for us to get the information that we need and the tools to make it to go forward. So I'm excited. So glad you shared that with us. And I'm so glad you spent this time with us this afternoon, just to tell your story, the importance of the Afro, and where we're going moving forward as relative to the plight of Black people, the plight of business, and our communities as a whole. So thank you so much.
His close number 6. I'd be remiss, and I would really be disappointed in myself if I didn't say that. And I give credit to God for what I've been able to do, but I want to give credit to my husband. A lot of the majority of the reason that I'm able to do so many different things is because we have a real partnership. And he wasn't one of those kind of guys that said, this is your part and this is my part. He was one of those guys that said, I support you, and I said, I support you. And we didn't ever argue about money. We've never argued about money in our 47 years. We didn't argue about raising children, even though he's a little softer on them, I think. But, and he wasn't a controlling kind of guy. We kind of flowed in a way that both of us are happy in that. So I want to give a shout out to my husband.
I love it. And as a man who is, I'm walking into my 11th year in marriage. It's always so good to see, and have those examples of folks who have gone through various decades and various changes. And so, it's just a blessing to be able to connect with people who have made it happen and still making it happen. I love it. I love it. Any last words?
My last word is, I believe it's true. Find what you're passionate about. Go for it with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Keep God at the center. Take time for yourself, but be sure that you give back to somebody who's coming behind you. Pay it forward. Be involved in your community. And I really do believe that when we do what we love and we do what we're called to do, then the money does come after that. So those are my parting words.
I feel good because I believe that too.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you for everyone who took time to listen in and connect with us here on this Perspectives with the Dreammakers Network. This is a jewel of a time for me. I've enjoyed every word that you shared with us. So thank you again,
You're welcome.
Dr. Toni Draper.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.